Detective Agatha Marple, The Parisian Affair. A Detective Tales. The Montmartre district of Paris gleamed with a golden haze as the afternoon sun dipped low, painting the cobblestones in warm light. Street vendors called out their wares, the rich scent of roasting chestnuts mingling with the faintly acrid tang of turpentine wafting from artists' studios. Above the clamor of street performers and laughter spilling from café terraces, the dome of Sacré-Cœur loomed, serene and eternal. To most, Montmartre was a haven of bohemian creativity and reckless abandon. To Agatha Marple, it was a study in contradictions, a gilded frame for a darker canvas. Agatha, clad in a sensible grey coat and modest hat, navigated the bustling streets with the deliberate air of a woman with nowhere urgent to be. She clutched a guidebook to Paris in one hand and a small leather notebook in the other, pausing occasionally to make notes. To an observer, she might have appeared an ordinary Englishwoman, indulging in the romance of the City of Light. In truth, her calm blue eyes missed nothing, least of all the intricate web of human interactions playing out before her. Her destination that afternoon was Galerie Bellamont, a modest but reputable establishment tucked between a patisserie and a tobacconist. The gallery was hosting an exhibition of works by up-and-coming artists, a perfect pretext for mingling with the creative elite of Montmartre. Inside, the air was thick with the competing scents of oil paint and expensive perfume. Agatha's gaze swept the room, noting the attendees with the quiet efficiency of a birdwatcher cataloguing a new species. There was the haughty critic gesturing dramatically with a cigarette, the nervous young painter lingering near their work, the patron in pearls appraising a canvas, as though weighing its value against her jewels. It was not the art, but the people, that interested Agatha. Magnificent, isn't it? A voice interrupted her observations. Agatha turned to find herself facing a young woman with auburn hair pulled into a loose knot, her smock smeared with an array of muted colors. The woman's hands, callosed and flecked with paint, betrayed a life spent in the service of art. "It has vitality," Agatha replied. Studying the painting, the woman indicated a chaotic swirl of color that seemed to pulse with movement, though one wonders if the artist was more intent on expressing their soul than communicating with their audience. The woman laughed, a sharp, self-deprecating sound. "You're not wrong. It's mine, Margot Hayes. And you've just summed up my greatest fear, that my work speaks only to me." Agatha tilted her head, her expression softening. "Nonsense. It has a raw honesty that's quite compelling. Agatha Marple, by the way. I dabble in art history." The two women chatted for a few moments longer, with Agatha skillfully guiding the conversation to glean Margot's circumstances. The young painter's ambition was palpable, but so too was her desperation, a hunger for recognition tempered by the harsh realities of a city teeming with competitors. Later that evening, Agatha found herself at a more raucous affair, a soirée hosted by the flamboyant art dealer Victor Lemoyne. The gilded salon was crowded with artists, patrons and critics, their voices rising in a symphony of gossip and laughter. Agatha moved through the throng like a wisp of smoke, her unobtrusive presence allowing her to overhear snippets of conversation. "Have you seen Leila lately?" Always fluttering about like a moth to the brightest flame, one woman murmured to her companion, a languid man with an air of practiced boredom. "She has to, doesn't she?" the man replied. "A girl like that doesn't survive in Montmartre without making herself indispensable." "Indispensable? To whom?" "Oh, take your pick. Etienne, Victor, even Claudine, though she'd deny it. The girl collects secrets like other people collect postcards. It's bound to catch up with her." Agatha's ears pricked at the name Lila. Though she made no outward sign of interest, she filed the conversation away in her mind. The next morning, as the bells of Sacré-Cœur tolled faintly in the distance, Agatha sat at a small café terrace, sipping tea and reviewing her notes. She had just begun contemplating her next move when a commotion on Rue des Abysses drew her attention. Rising from her seat, she followed the sound of raised voices to a small crowd gathered outside a studio. A young woman was being escorted out by two officers, her face pale and streaked with tears. Agatha recognized her immediately. "Margot Hayes. She was just there when I came in. She was already," Margot stammered, her voice breaking. Agatha's eyes moved past the crowd to the open doorway of the studio. Through the narrow gap, she glimpsed the interior, a chaise long overturned, a pool of dark crimson on the wooden floor, and a figure slumped in the corner, lifeless. Agatha took a step back, her calm demeanor masking the spark of intrigue that ignited within her. The vibrant streets of Montmartre had just revealed their shadow, and at the center of it was a dead woman and a young artist in distress. As Margot was led away, Agatha slipped through the dispersing crowd and made her way toward the studio, her sharp mind already at work. A body, a scandal, and an undercurrent of secrets. This, she thought, was a puzzle worth solving. The morning light filtered through the iron-framed windows of Margot's modest studio, throwing long shadows across the wooden floor. Despite the chaos of the previous evening, the room retained its artistic charm. Half-finished canvases leaned against the walls, jars of brushes sat in haphazard clusters, and the scent of linseed oil lingered in the air. But now, the scene was marred by the presence of police, their heavy boots and stern expressions breaking the fragile serenity of the space. Agatha Marple entered quietly, her expression one of mild curiosity as she clutched her guidebook and notebook. She had informed the officers at the door that she was a visiting art historian fascinated by the bustling Montmartre scene, a claim they had readily accepted. To them, she was harmless, a grey-haired Englishwoman with a penchant for asking too many questions. Inside, she took in the room with a glance so swift and practiced it could have been mistaken for absent-mindedness. Yet every detail lodged itself firmly in her mind. The overturned chaise longue where Leila's body had been found, the spilled vase on the floor, and the faint smudge of crimson paint on the wooden boards. She moved toward the easel where Margot's latest painting stood, a portrait, though incomplete, with broad dynamic strokes that suggested Margot's restlessness. Nearby, a palette lay abandoned, its colors vivid and chaotic. Agatha crouched slightly, peering at the floor beneath the easel. There she spotted a faint smear of paint green, almost jewel-like in its hue. Rising, she cast her gaze to Lila's discarded dress, folded neatly by an officer. Agatha stepped closer, her sharp eyes noting the contrast. A streak of pale pink paint marred the fabric. A peculiar detail, she thought. The green on the floor didn't match the pink on Lila's dress, and neither color appeared on the palette Margot had been using. Her gaze flicked to the pendant hanging from a cord atop a small evidence table. It was an unusual piece, a cameo carved into what appeared to be black onyx, its edges set in delicate filigree. Though unremarkable at first glance, Agatha's instincts told her it bore significance. A young woman in Montmartre would not have worn such a piece without a reason. Agatha glanced across the room to where Margot sat on a low stool, her head in her hands. The painter's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling as she clutched a handkerchief. Every now and then, she glanced nervously at the officers, her lips moving as if rehearsing explanations she couldn't bring herself to say aloud. Agatha approached her with a soft step, settling onto a nearby stool. "Miss Hayes," she said gently, her voice low enough not to attract the officer's attention. Margot looked up, startled, then recognized her from the gallery. "Oh, it's you," she murmured. "You shouldn't be here." "They think I did it." Agatha's expression softened. "And what do you think?" "I don't know." Margot's voice cracked. "I found her like that. She was supposed to model for me this morning. When I arrived, her breath hitched. She was already gone. I swear I didn't hurt her. I couldn't." Agatha studied her closely, noting the raw panic in her eyes. Margot's fear was genuine. But it wasn't the fear of someone caught in a lie, it was the fear of someone who had been thrust into a situation far beyond their control. Reaching out, Agatha patted her hand. "Don't fret, my dear. I believe you." Margot blinked, her lips trembling. "Why? Why would you believe me?" "Because you have the temperament of an artist, not a murderer," Agatha replied with a wry smile. "And because the scene doesn't quite fit the story they're telling themselves." Later, under the guise of polite inquiry, Agatha mingled with those who had gathered outside the studio, their curiosity drawing them like moths to a flame. It wasn't long before she found herself face to face with Etienne Moreau. The sculptor was a tall man, his broad shoulders and rough hands betraying years of working with stone. His eyes were dark and restless, his expression shifting between irritation and melancholy. "Lila was amused to many of us," Etienne said when Agatha broached the subject. "But she was complicated. She had a way of making you feel inspired and trapped all at once. I suppose that's what made her so unforgettable." "Unforgettable, indeed," Agatha murmured. "And yet you sound almost relieved to be rid of her." Etienne's jaw tightened. "What are you implying?" "Nothing at all," she replied with a disarming smile. "Just an observation." Dane. Her next encounter was with Victor Lemoyne, the art dealer who had hosted the soiree the previous evening. Victor was all charm and polish, his slick-back hair and sharp suit giving him the appearance of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Lila?" "A tragedy, of course," he said, waving a cigarette holder in one hand. "But Montmartre is full of tragedies, isn't it? She was a beautiful girl, but she didn't know how to stay out of trouble." "And what sort of trouble might that have been?" Agatha inquired. Victor's smile tightened. "Artists are a jealous breed, Miss Marple. Lila, how shall I put it? She was generous with her attention, perhaps too generous for her own good." Finally, Agatha found herself speaking with Claudine Dubois, a petite woman with sharp features and an equally sharp tongue. Claudine's paintings adorned the gallery walls with a precision that reflected their creator's rigid personality. "Lila had no discipline," Claudine said dismissively. "She thought beauty was enough to get by." "But beauty fades, doesn't it? And what's left then?" Agatha studied her, noting the flicker of disdain in her voice. "You didn't like her," she said plainly. Claudine's lips twisted. She was a distraction, and she always knew just where to place herself to cause the most chaos. As Agatha walked away from the crime scene, her mind turned over the day's events. Each person she had spoken to had their own motives, their own secrets. Etienne's brooding anger, Victor's slippery charm, Claudine's thinly veiled resentment each held a piece of the puzzle. And then there were the details, the mismatched paint, the overturned vase, the pendant. Subtle clues, easily overlooked by those too quick to assign guilt to Margot. Agatha's lips curved into a faint smile. The game, she thought, was afoot. Montmartre in the evening was a study in contrasts. The golden light of day gave way to a kaleidoscope of shadows, where the laughter of revelers spilled into narrow, twisting alleys. Cabaret music drifted on the breeze, mingling with the distant chime of church bells and the rattle of cart wheels on cobblestones. The district was alive, but beneath its vibrant veneer, Agatha Marple knew, lay a darker undercurrent of ambition, betrayal, and desperation. Seated at a corner table in Le Chat Noir, a café notorious for its bohemian clientele, Agatha observed her surroundings with the practiced air of someone whose interest was merely academic. The room buzzed with conversation, the clink of glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter. Artists, poets, and dilettantes flitted about like moths drawn to the café's dim gaslight. But Agatha's attention was focused on the small journal resting in her lap, a journal she had found hidden among Lila's belongings. The journal's pages were filled with sketches, quick, precise drawings that seemed innocuous at first glance. A half-finished portrait of a man with sharp features, the outline of a café awning, and what appeared to be a map of Montmartre's winding streets. But it was the recurring image of a pendant, meticulously detailed, that held Agatha's attention. The same pendant Lila had been wearing when she was found dead. Agatha tapped her pencil against the table, her mind piecing together the fragments. The pendant wasn't just jewelry, it was a symbol, a key, perhaps, to a world Lila had been drawn into. The sketches hinted at clandestine meetings in Montmartre's hidden corners, places where secrets changed hands and danger was never far behind. The next day, Agatha took her findings to the police, presenting them with a theory. She spoke in her usual measured tone, laying out the connections between the sketches, the pendant, and Lila's untimely demise. "I believe the pendant is more than a personal trinket," Agatha said, her gaze steady. "It may be a marker of some kind, perhaps identifying those involved in the smuggling of stolen art. These sketches suggest Lila frequented specific locations, places where such dealings might occur." The inspector, a stout man with a waxed moustache, leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "Madame Marple, while your observations are intriguing, they are hardly evidence. These sketches could mean anything. And as for the pendant, well, it's hardly unusual for a young woman to wear jewelry." Agatha tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Of course, Inspector. I wouldn't expect you to act on mere conjecture. But might I suggest you examine the pendant more closely? You may find it has a hidden compartment, or perhaps an engraving." The inspector waved her off with a dismissive chuckle. "You've been reading too many novels, madame. Leave the detective work to the professionals." Agatha rose from her seat, adjusting her gloves with deliberate precision. "As you wish, Inspector. But you may find that even the most unassuming objects can hold the most remarkable secrets. Good day." Undeterred by the inspector's dismissal, Agatha pursued the leads on her own, her path guided by Lila's journal. One particular sketch, a distinctive wrought iron gate, adorned with roses, led her to La Rose Noire, a cabaret known for its smoky atmosphere and clientele that preferred discretion. The cabaret was everything Agatha had anticipated, dimly lit, with velvet drapes framing a small stage where a chanteuse crooned a sultry tune. The air was heavy with the scent of spilled wine and unspoken promises. Agatha, her presence as unobtrusive as ever, took a seat near the back and ordered a modest glass of sherry. Her attention was drawn to a corner table where Victor Lemoyne, the suave art dealer, sat with a man whose sharp features matched one of the sketches in Lila's journal. They spoke in low voices, their expressions guarded. Agatha's sharp eyes caught the faint glint of a pendant hanging from the man's neck, identical to Lila's. As Agatha left the cabaret, she felt the weight of someone watching her. The feeling persisted as she walked through the twisting streets, her steps quick but unhurried. She slipped into a narrow alley, waiting in the shadows. Moments later, a figure emerged, a young man with a wiry build, his coat collar turned up against the chill. "Can I help you, monsieur?" Agatha's voice, calm and precise, startled the man. He stammered, his French thick with the accent of the working class. I was just following me," she supplied, her tone faintly amused. "A word of advice, young man. If you're going to shadow someone, do try to be subtle." "Now, who sent you?" The man hesitated, then bolted, his footsteps echoing in the empty alley. Agatha let him go. She had learned what she needed to know: someone was watching her, which meant she was on the right track. Back in her room that evening, Agatha examined the pendant she had taken from Lila's belongings, turning it over in her hands. Her fingers traced the delicate filigree, searching for anything out of place. Then, with a faint click, a hidden compartment opened, revealing a small folded note. The note was simple yet damning, a list of initials paired with sums of money. Agatha recognized several of the names patrons of Montmartre's art scene, including Victor Lemoyne. It was evidence enough to prove Lila's involvement in a black market scheme, and perhaps to uncover the identity of her killer. Agatha's lips curved into a thin smile. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the puzzle was far from complete. As she extinguished the lamp, her mind was already plotting her next move. Montmartre's secrets were unraveling, one thread at a time, and Agatha Marple had no intention of stopping until the mystery was laid bare. The studio was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards under Agatha Marple's sensible shoes. The scent of turpentine lingered in the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of dried blood, a reminder of the recent crime that had taken place within these walls. Margot Hayes, pale and trembling, had reluctantly given Agatha access to the studio after the inspector's brusque dismissal of her as a meddlesome tourist. Agatha moved with purpose, her sharp eyes sweeping the room. Every detail mattered. She paused by the overturned chaise longue, her fingers brushing the fabric lightly. The bloodstains had been cleaned, but the aura of violence lingered, a grim undercurrent beneath the artistic chaos of the room. Her attention was drawn to a battered wooden chest, tucked into a corner, its surface scarred by years of use. Agatha knelt and opened it, revealing a jumble of paint tubes, brushes, and sketchbooks. As she sifted through the contents, her fingers grazed something unusual, a false bottom. With a deft twist of her wrist, Agatha pried the panel loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The paper was worn, the ink smudged in places, but the handwriting was delicate and precise. Agatha unfolded the first letter and scanned its contents. "My dearest," it began, "you are the light in my dark days, the muse who brings color to my world. I long for the day when we can cast aside these secrets and live openly without fear." The letter was unsigned, but the sentiments were clear. These were love letters, written by Lila to an unnamed lover. Agatha's brow furrowed as she considered the implications. Who was this lover, and why had Lila kept these letters hidden? More importantly, could there have been a motive for murder? Later that evening, Agatha found herself navigating the winding streets of Montmartre, the cobblestones slick with a recent rain. She was following a lead. A name mentioned in one of Lila's letters had brought her to a small café on Rue des Abysses. The café was dimly lit and nearly empty, its patrons casting furtive glances at one another, as though each carried a secret too heavy to share. Agatha ordered a modest glass of wine and took a seat near the back, her eyes scanning the room. A man entered, his hat pulled low over his brow, and slipped a folded note to the bartender before vanishing into the night. Agatha's instincts prickled. The bartender glanced at the note, then tucked it into his apron without a word. She rose, leaving her untouched wine, and stepped into the cool night air. The streets were quieter now, the revelry of Montmartre subdued in the late hour. As she turned down a narrow alley, she heard the faint echo of footsteps behind her. Agatha slowed her pace, her hand tightening on the handle of her umbrella. The footsteps quickened. She spun around just as a figure lunged from the shadows, their face obscured by a black scarf. "Stay back," Agatha commanded, her voice firm. The figure hesitated for a fraction of a second, enough time for Agatha to thrust the tip of her umbrella toward their midsection. The masked assailant stumbled, cursing in French, before retreating into the darkness. Agatha straightened her coat, her pulse steady despite the close call. "Amateurs," she muttered under her breath, resuming her walk with an air of unbothered composure. The next morning, Agatha returned to Margot's studio to examine the artist's supplies. Among the array of paint tubes, she noticed something unusual, a mixture of pigments that didn't align with the rest of Margot's palette. The shade was a muted olive green, distinct from the vibrant colors Margot typically used in her work. Agatha uncapped the tube and sniffed lightly, noting a faintly acrid smell. It wasn't just paint, it had been mixed with a chemical, likely to alter its consistency or drying time. The scent triggered a memory from her visit to La Rose Noire, where she had seen a similar shade smeared on the cuff of Etienne Moreau's jacket. She closed the tube and slipped it into her handbag, her mind racing. If this peculiar paint mixture was unique to one artist, it could place them at the scene of the crime. Combined with the letters and the pendant, the evidence was beginning to form a pattern. That evening, as Agatha sat by the window of her modest room, she laid out the pieces of the puzzle. The letters pointed to a secret affair, but the identity of Leela's lover remained elusive. The pendant suggested ties to a black market art ring, and now the paint mixture hinted at the involvement of someone within Margot's artistic circle. Etienne Moreau, the brooding sculptor with a history of temperamental outbursts, had the skill to create the unique paint mixture. Victor Lemoine, the art dealer, had the connections to move stolen works and the charm to manipulate those around him. And Claudine Dubois, with her simmering jealousy and disdain for Leela, had plenty of motive. Agatha's sharp mind connected the threads, but the picture was still incomplete. There was something she was missing, something small but crucial. As the rain began to patter against the window, Agatha's thoughts crystallized. Tomorrow she would confront the suspects directly. The truth was within reach, and she intended to pull it from the shadows, no matter how deeply it was buried. The grey light of dawn broke over Montmartre, casting a muted glow over the cobbled streets and shuttered cafes. Paris was still waking, its usual exuberance subdued by the early hour. Inside the modest sitting room of her lodgings, Agatha Marple sat at a small writing desk, her keen eyes fixed on the notes and sketches spread before her. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they revealed was far darker than she had anticipated. She had spent the previous day retracing Lila's movements and revisiting the cryptic sketches in her journal. The coded drawings, when mapped against Montmartre's labyrinthine streets, pointed to a series of clandestine meetings held in specific locations: a dimly lit cabaret, a secluded artist's studio, and the back room of a seemingly innocuous gallery. These places, Agatha now understood, were nodes in a sprawling web of illicit dealings, a black market art ring operating under the cover of bohemian creativity. At the center of it all was Leela, the unfortunate muse who had unwittingly become both a pawn and a liability. She had known too much and had paid the ultimate price for her proximity to the truth. Agatha's first stop that morning was the studio of Etienne Moreau, the tormented sculptor whose brooding demeanor had always struck her as performative, a mask for something darker. She arrived unannounced, her umbrella tapping against the doorframe as she waited for an answer. When Etienne opened the door, his face darkened at the sight of her. "Madame Marple," he said, his voice tinged with irritation. "What brings you here at such an hour?" "Curiosity," Agatha replied lightly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The studio was cluttered with half-finished sculptures, the air thick with the scent of clay and sweat. She moved slowly, her gloved hand brushing against a table laden with tools and jars of pigment. "I've been thinking about Leela," Agatha said, her tone conversational. "She was a fascinating young woman, wasn't she? So many admirers, so many secrets." Etienne's jaw tightened, his hands flexing unconsciously. She was complicated. A muse, yes, but also a distraction. She liked to meddle in things that didn't concern her, such as the provenance of certain artworks. Agatha's question hung in the air, deceptively mild. Etienne's eyes flicked toward her, a flicker of something fear, perhaps crossing his face. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," Agatha said, her voice sharpening. "You knew about the smuggling operation. You knew Lila was becoming a liability. And you, or someone close to you, decided to silence her before she could bring it all crashing down." Etienne stepped back, his expression closing off. "I suggest you leave, Madame Marple. Now." Agatha tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "I'll leave when I have what I need, monsieur. Not before." That evening, Agatha returned to La Rose Noire, the cabaret where so many threads of this mystery seemed to converge. The dimly lit room was alive with the sound of laughter and music, but beneath the gaiety was an undercurrent of tension. The artists and patrons who frequented this place had all known Lila, and her death had cast a long shadow. Agatha took her usual seat near the back, her eyes scanning the crowd. It didn't take long for her to spot Victor Lemoine, the suave art dealer who had been one of Lila's most ardent admirers. He was seated at a corner table, a glass of brandy in hand, his expression guarded. She approached him with deliberate calm, her steps measured. "Monsieur Lemoine," she said, taking the seat opposite him without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Victor raised an eyebrow, his smile faint and humorless. "Madame Marple, to what do I owe this pleasure?" "To Lila," Agatha replied, "and to the truth about her death." Victor's smile faltered, and for the first time Agatha saw the cracks in his polished facade. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Agatha said, her voice cool. "You were the one who introduced her to the black market ring, weren't you? You saw her as an asset, someone who could charm her way into places others couldn't. But when she began asking too many questions, you realized she was a risk." Victor set his glass down with deliberate care, his knuckles white. "This is absurd. You have no proof." "Don't I?" Agatha leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "The letters she wrote, the pendant she wore, the peculiar paint mixture found in Margot's studio, everything points back to you. You manipulated those around you, used them to cover your tracks, but you made one mistake: you underestimated me." Victor's composure shattered. He rose abruptly, but before he could make his escape, two officers stepped forward from the shadows, their presence a testament to Agatha's meticulous planning. As Victor was led away, Agatha allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The web of deceit had been untangled, and justice, however imperfect, would be served. Later, as she walked through the quiet streets of Montmartre, Agatha reflected on the events of the past week. The opulence and charm of this district had concealed its darkness well, but no secret could remain hidden forever. Pausing at a café terrace, she ordered a cup of tea and opened her notebook. The case was closed, but the questions it raised about human nature lingered. Greed, jealousy, fear, these were the true culprits, the forces that had driven Victor Lemoine and others to commit acts of betrayal and violence. With a faint smile, Agatha sipped her tea. There would always be mysteries to solve, shadows to illuminate. And she, for one, was glad to oblige. The abandoned gallery on Rue des Martyrs stood shrouded in shadows, its once grand facade faded and chipped. Dust hung in the still air like a veil, and the faint smell of mildew clung to the remnants of forgotten canvases and broken easels scattered across the floor. Agatha Marple stood in the center of the cavernous room, her posture unassuming but her gaze sharp, every detail of the scene committed to memory. The gallery had been carefully chosen, remote enough to avoid prying eyes but central enough to guarantee Victor Lemoine would accept her invitation. The note she'd sent him had been deliberately vague yet tantalizing. "New evidence has come to light. Meet me at the old Belmont Gallery tonight, or the truth will come to you through the authorities." Victor's pride and fear of exposure would ensure his attendance. Men like him, Agatha knew, thrived on control but crumbled when their grip slipped. As the clock struck 11, the creak of the gallery's front door echoed through the space. Victor entered, his polished shoes disturbing the layer of dust on the floor. He was immaculately dressed, as always, his suit pressed and his tie perfectly knotted, but his expression betrayed his unease. "Madame Marple," he said smoothly, though his voice wavered at the edges. "You're quite dramatic, aren't you? An abandoned gallery, mysterious letters. Are we to rehearse a melodrama?" Agatha's lips curved into a faint smile. "Oh, I'm not much for dramatics, monsieur. but I do appreciate the irony of solving a crime in a place where so many fictions have been bought and sold. Victor's eyes narrowed. If you have evidence, I suggest you present it now. I've no time for games. Oh, but you've had plenty of time for games, haven't you? Agatha countered, her tone light but firm. The black market dealings, the stolen masterpieces, the manipulations. And then, when Lila grew too bold, too curious, you silenced her. Victor's composure faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of something in his eyes. Too quick for anyone but Agatha to catch. He straightened, forcing a smile. You have no proof. You're grasping at shadows, madame. Agatha stepped forward, her calm demeanor unshaken. The pendant found on Lila, monsieur. A symbol of her connection to your smuggling operation. The coded sketches in her journal, detailing your meeting places. And most damning of all, the peculiar paint mixture used to forge the stolen works, a mixture only found in your studio. Victor's expression darkened, his mask of civility slipping. Ridiculous. Margaret Hayes was the one painting those forgeries. She used Lila as her go-between. I had nothing to do with it. An intriguing deflection, Agatha replied, her voice crisp, but one that doesn't hold up. You see, Margot is many things talented, naive, but she is not a liar. And unlike you, monsieur, she had no motive to kill. Victor's hand twitched toward his pocket, but Agatha's voice cut through the silence like a blade. I wouldn't, if I were you. The police are already on their way. Any rash actions now would only confirm your guilt. Victor hesitated, the weight of his situation pressing down on him. For a moment, the gallery was silent save for the distant sound of a train whistle cutting through the night. Then, with a sigh that carried the resignation of a man who had lost everything, Victor sank into a nearby chair. She was going to ruin everything, he said, his voice low and bitter. Lila thought she could play both sides, use her charm to gain access to secrets, and then blackmail me. She underestimated how much I had at stake. Agatha's gaze remained steady. So you decided to kill her. She left me no choice. Victor snapped, his voice rising. She was reckless, unpredictable. If the authorities found out about the smuggling operation, everything I've worked for would have been destroyed. Agatha tilted her head, her expression tinged with pity. And now it is, monsieur. But not because of Lila. Because of your greed. Before Victor could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the gallery entrance. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence a testament to Agatha's meticulous planning. The inspector, his moustache bristling with satisfaction, approached with a pair of handcuffs. Victor Lemoyne, you are under arrest for the murder of Lila Beaumont and for your involvement in the illegal trade of stolen art, the inspector declared. Victor stood, his face a mask of fury and defeat. As the officers led him away, he cast a final glare at Agatha. You think you've won, Madame Marple. But the world isn't as simple as your little puzzles. Agatha's smile was faint but resolute. Perhaps not, monsieur. But justice has a way of finding its path, no matter how tangled the web. As the gallery fell silent once more, Agatha remained standing in the center of the room, her thoughts already turning to the details of the case. There would be reports to write, testimonies to give, but for now, she allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. Montmartre had been a canvas painted with deceit and desperation, but the truth, like a skilled artist's brushstroke, had brought clarity to the chaos. Agatha adjusted her hat and picked up her umbrella. Outside, the city awaited, its streets alive with stories yet to be uncovered. And for Agatha Marple, there was always another mystery waiting just around the corner. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Margot Hayes' studio, casting soft, golden light over the cluttered space. The easels stood like silent sentinels, the scattered brushes and unfinished canvases a testament to an artist's life interrupted. Margot sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, her face pale but composed. Across from her, Agatha Marple regarded her with a kind yet analytical gaze, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. You've been exonerated, Agatha said gently, her tone calm and reassuring. The inspector himself admitted he acted hastily. You were never truly a suspect, Margot, only a convenient scapegoat. Margot's lips trembled, but she managed a weak smile. Thank you, Miss Marple. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened. As she broke off, staring into her tea, I don't think I'll ever feel safe here again. Lila's death, the accusations, Victor's betrayal, it's too much. Agatha tilted her head, studying the young woman. You've endured more than most, my dear. But don't let this frighten you away from your art. Montmartre may be a place of shadows, but it is also one of light, and you, I suspect, have much to offer it." Margot nodded, though her eyes remained clouded. Agatha's words were well-meaning, but healing, she knew, would take time. The art smuggling ring, as Agatha had uncovered, was as intricate as any masterpiece. Victor Lemoyne's operation had spanned years, his network of forgers and buyers reaching into the highest echelons of Parisian society. With his arrest, stolen masterpieces were being recovered, their rightful owners notified. The newspapers were already hailing it as the scandal of the decade, though Agatha, as ever, preferred to remain in the background. The pendant, with its hidden compartment, had been the key to unraveling the entire scheme. It contained not just a list of transactions, but also the identities of Lemoyne's most prominent clients' names that would cause quite a stir when revealed. Agatha, however, left those details to the authorities. Her work was done. That evening, Agatha returned to her modest lodgings for the last time. The small room, with its creaky floorboards and mismatched furniture, had served as her base throughout the investigation. Now, as she packed her belongings, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. Sitting at the worn desk, she opened her journal and dipped her pen into the inkwell. The pages were filled with her neat, precise handwriting, each entry a record of the case as it had unfolded. She wrote now with deliberate care, her thoughts flowing effortlessly onto the page. Human nature, as always, proves itself a labyrinth, twisting, turning, and often leading us into the darker corners of our own desires. Greed, jealousy, fear, these are the threads that wove the tragedy of Lila Beaumont's death. And yet, amidst the shadows, there are glimmers of light, the courage of the innocent, the redemption of the wronged, and the triumph of truth over deceit. She paused, her pen hovering above the paper. Then, with a faint smile, she added, "Montmartre is a place of contradictions, much like its inhabitants. I leave it now, not with a sense of closure, but with the quiet satisfaction that justice, however imperfect, has been served." The next morning, Agatha boarded the train bound for Calais. The station was bustling, the clamor of porters and passengers filling the air, but Agatha remained serene as she settled into her seat. Through the window, the skyline of Paris faded into the distance, the city's secrets left behind. As the train began its journey, Agatha opened a small book she had tucked into her bag, a volume on Impressionist art. Though the case was closed, her curiosity about the artists of Montmartre remained. Turning a page, she paused to reflect on a thought she had written in her journal. In every masterpiece, there is a shadow, a reminder that light and darkness coexist, inseparable and eternal. And so, with a faint smile and her ever-sharp mind, Agatha Marple returned to her quiet life in England, ready for whatever mystery might come her way next. The rhythmic hum of the Orient Express filled the luxurious compartment as it rattled gently along the tracks. Beyond the lace-curtained window, the Parisian countryside unfurled like a painter's masterpiece, with golden fields and clusters of trees glowing under the soft morning sun. Agatha Marple sat by the window, a small leather notebook balanced on her lap and a silver mechanical pencil in her hand. She had always been a meticulous observer of people, a habit that now extended to the pages of her notebook. On the clean ivory paper, she had begun sketching the faces of those she had encountered in Montmartre. The lines were light, but purposeful: Etienne Moreau's brooding eyes, Victor Lemoyne's polished yet serpentine smile, Claudine Dubois' sharp features etched with disdain. Each portrait, though incomplete, seemed to capture the essence of its subject. Agatha paused, tapping the pencil against her chin. Her gaze drifted out the window, where the receding silhouette of Paris rose and fell in the distance, the iron spire of the Eiffel Tower standing sentinel over the city. A faint smile played on her lips, as she considered how many secrets lay hidden in the alleys and salons of Montmartre, masked by laughter, art, and charm. The train compartment was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of conversation and the clink of a silver spoon against porcelain as a steward prepared tea for a passenger down the aisle. Agatha sipped her own tea, savoring the warmth as her mind wandered through the labyrinth of events she had so recently untangled. Lila Beaumont, the tragic muse, had been a young woman of contradictions, ambitious yet vulnerable, charming yet reckless. Victor Lemoyne's betrayal had been the final stroke in a canvas painted with greed and deception. And yet, Agatha couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. Men like Victor, she mused, often began with small transgressions, only to find themselves caught in webs of their own making. She returned her gaze to her sketches, adding the faint curve of a smile to Margot Hayes' portrait. The young artist had been through a storm but would emerge stronger for it, Agatha thought. Perhaps one day Margot's paintings would hang in galleries far grander than the modest exhibitions of Montmartre. Agatha made a final note beside Margot's likeness. Courage in the face of adversity is often found in the most unassuming souls. The compartment door slid open with a soft click, and a well-dressed man stepped inside. He was tall and neatly groomed, his tailored suit bearing the marks of wealth and taste. With a polite nod, he gestured to the empty seat across from Agatha. "May I?" Of course, Agatha replied, her tone genial but watchful. As the train resumed its steady rhythm, the man introduced himself as Monsieur Dupont, a financier on his way to Milan. Their conversation began pleasantly enough, polite inquiries about the journey, the weather, and shared admiration for the train's opulent decor. But Agatha noted the way his eyes flicked occasionally to her notebook, his curiosity barely concealed. "An artist, madame?" he asked at last, nodding toward the sketches. "Oh, not at all," Agatha said with a smile. "Merely an observer of people. I find that faces often reveal more than words ever could." Monsieur Dupont chuckled lightly, but Agatha noticed the faint twitch of discomfort in his expression. It was a reaction she had grown accustomed to. People rarely enjoyed the idea of being truly seen. As the train crossed into the open countryside, Agatha returned to her notebook, adding a few final touches to the sketches. One page remained blank, its pristine surface waiting patiently for the next mystery to reveal itself. She knew it wouldn't be long. Wherever there were people, there were secrets, and wherever there were secrets, there was inevitably a puzzle waiting to be solved. The world, Agatha often reflected, was a vast and intricate tapestry of greed, love, jealousy, and fear, each thread intertwining to create patterns both beautiful and tragic. Her thoughts were interrupted by the conductor's voice announcing the next station. Agatha closed her notebook and slipped it into her bag, her movements unhurried. The city of light had faded into the distance, but the glow of its mysteries lingered in her mind, as vivid as the sketches she had drawn. As the train slowed to a stop, Agatha adjusted her hat and smoothed her gloves. Her sharp mind, ever alert, was already turning over the possibilities that lay ahead. Somewhere, another story was beginning, a tale of secrets, lies, and the eternal quest for truth. With a serene smile, Agatha Marple stepped off the train, ready for whatever the world might bring her next.